Hi everyone, this is Fred. So today's video is about shading in VectorStyler or vector software that you have. And we will start with a quick reminder about shadows. Then we'll see some of the tools I use. And then I will just make a little case study to show you how I did this image you can see right now. Okay, so let's start with a quick reminder about light and shadows. The definition of shadows is basically the part of an object, some area of an object or the surface that doesn't fully receive the light from a light source or doesn't receive any light at all. The two cases, most common cases, is because the part of the object, the portion of the object, is on the opposite direction from the light source, or the object, like here, cannot receive the light source because it's blocked by another object. In that case, it's the cast shadow. There is another category that is mostly used in 3D. It's called the ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is more about the little shadows that appears, especially in the fold part of the body or things like this, or in a lot of shapes. Very small areas, and that doesn't receive the light. And for instance, your finger, you have your fingers, you have the limitation of a phalanx, and when you fold it, you can see that it's becoming dark. This is kind of things that helps to define the shape in some cases. So it's the third kind, but the most common is about the shadow and the cast shadows, and this is the one we will see today mainly. So for the characteristic of a light, there is different. The first one, of course, is the direction. The direction of the light will define the direction of the shadow, because the shadow is always the opposite. So the two main kind of light are the sunlight, which is considered by its convention, but it's considered as parallel, although it's not technically totally true. And the second one is what we call the bulb light. And a bulb light, like you have electric bulb someone in your house, and it spread the light in a different way because it goes on all direction, even if it stops and rebound on the ceiling. So it's the two main kind of light. After, of course, you can have the spotlight with specific direction, etc. So, but what we have to keep in mind is that the direction is important. And in the case of drawing, it's important because it makes the drawing consistent. If you have a direction which is defined from the beginning, and after, all the shadows, they should obey the same rule and the same direction. The second characteristic is intensity. Intensity means that the strength of the light will produce different shadows. For instance, on a very bright day, the sun rays, they produce very crisp, sharp cast shadows and shadows. So it's very, you can see very clearly the limit of the object. But in some cases, for instance, there is an overcast sky, and instead of having very focused sun ray, they dilute it, they spread inside the clouds, and it gives some kind of overall light. And in that case, the shadows, they can be no shadows at all in some case, or they can be quite blurry. And something phenomena you can see sometimes on a beautiful day, and a cloud is temporarily hiding the sun, but the light's still there, and you see that the shadows is sharp and then blur and then sharp again when the cloud disappears. So this is about intensity. The color, so the color of the light, of course, the typical example is a sunset. You will have everything become warm. Everything that obeys to this light will become warm, and also between the bright day, like a blue sky, and an overcast day, which is gray. And since it's gray, will give a gray light, and everything around will be less intense in terms of hue and saturation. and so the color of the light is also important. And there is two other parameters, a little bit less important, but the number of sources, because we as artists, we can just decide how many light source we have. We can maybe put 1, 2, 3, 4, 20 if we want, and we can make them different in color, different in intensity, and different in direction. So this is also a parameter you can use in your creation. Another thing is also the rebounds. The rebounds is something that is important to create something which looks real, and that's why the 3D software have a lot of calculation to do about the rebounds of the light to make things look very real. And so that's the fact that of course there is the direct sunlight or a light ray of light, but also the global light is bouncing all around, and even some parts of the object which are in the shades, they're still visible, and they still have sometimes a little part which is a little bit brighter, like we can see here. So it's because the light is bouncing. Okay. Two other parameters we have to focus on is the shape themselves, the object which receive the light. So there is two aspects: is the sharp object with sharp angle, and all the round object like solids of revolution. And in that case, when we draw for the sharp angles, of course you have the limit between the sides of the object are very clear and sharp and visible. And in the case of solids of revolution, whatever is a sphere, a cylinder, or a cone, the transition is more gradual. So it means that you will use gradient when you want to show the transition from the shadows to the light, to the lighted side. The second part is shiny versus matte. If your objects are shiny, the way they reflect, they absorb and reflect the light is a little bit different. It means that you have something a little bit more intense, and also you can see that it's more exaggerated from every side. The shadows are a little bit darker and the light is a little bit lighter, so brighter. So that's a little difference, and something that can help also to if you want to render some materials. Although I'm not doing super realistic stuff, but just it can help sometimes to give some information. Okay, so to see the basic of the shading, the way I do it, of course there is several ways, but my workflow, my process, I start talking about the background. Like in digital painting, I don't want to use a white background because it's too bright, and it can alter the way you perceive the colors and the shades. So it's better, in my opinion, it's better to start with something which is gray, or if you already know the color you will use in your final drawing, of course you can use the background color you will use later, because you already can see the effect you will have. So this is the first advice. The second advice I would say is to have a limited use of a black and white. I mean pure black and pure white. Try to keep it for a specific use and a limited use, and doing that you will give them more power, which is important. If everything is if there is too much black and white for this kind of course of drawing, like I show you, it's not about it's not a general comment. Of course, if you're doing comics or if it's your own style, do it. But what I mean, if you want to have something a little bit smooth in the transition and things like that, don't overuse the pure white and pure black. Okay, while doing this, I just make some simple object, and I use a cylinder just because it's a solid of revolution, and we talk about the fact that solid of revolution, they have a gradient for the shades, because of the transition of the light is gradual. So the things I use, the tools I use are mainly, really most of the time, is the gradient. So the gradient in the case of a cylinder, if you consider that it will be a linear gradient in that case. So let's do it. So I start with something very simple, and then I go to the gradient itself. I can here reverse if I decide that the light is coming from another spot, and of course I can here or inside the here, so it's up to you. Here you have a control, it can be a control using keyboard and value, or you can do it visually. So in that case you can also, of course, so play with the shape. You can change. This is of course the most classic use, you know. Okay, it can be brighter, it can be darker, bluer, etc., etc. So you have to handle it. So like I just told you, try to avoid the full black. So in that case, what you will do, maybe you will be using a not totally full black, and in some case a little bit colored. Okay, colored one, a very, very strong dark blue in that case, because it is blue, but you can use it. And you see that in that case the translation is smoother. Like we said before, light is bouncing, so in some cases you can just you double click somewhere here and you will just move the shape. Sorry, I have to select first. And you just move your colors, and it will give you this feeling of the bouncing light, some bouncing light. In that case, I can make even my my background even a little bit darker. Yeah, so I think it's better. Yes, much better. So, and I hope that the video will show it. Okay, so you see, just with this simple gradient, linear gradient, I give a nice smooth shading. So this is something I use a lot. Another thing I use a lot is duplicating the shapes, and so I can have several effects at once. For instance, the body of my cylinder, I copy it, and I would just use, I don't know, sorry, and I will use another gradient, but maybe this gradient will be for some reason another style, because I want to create some effect. I don't know, why not in that case. Okay, and depending on the fusion mode, I can use, for instance, some blending mode, like screen or a multiply or whatever. I can have a double effect. So it's interesting. My gradient is a bit weird, but I just need to change this. Okay, and you see that in that case I have two effects. I have a light coming from here, let's say, and this is coming from here. It starts to be a little bit more subtle than the previous one. It starts to be interesting. So you have to, of course, have a consistent light, sorry, and in that case you can have some nice effect, a nice transition. So as you can see, when I do Command Y, you see that the line work is very clean, because I just duplicate the same shape. So it's quite interesting, because it gives when you have a lot of shapes, like the character I will show you later, it's good to be able to identify every part of a body or something like that, to quickly apply some colors. So this is the first thing. The second thing I use for the shading is not very logical here, but it's just for showing it. I will use a shape that maybe I would just put a shape. Let's say that I will have some kind of highlight. So in that case, when I do some highlight stuff, I will make the Alt W to make my stroke. What I really use a lot, so I will give some thickness, for instance. So my highlights will be like this. Of course, I will use some blur. So I select my path and I go to the effect, and I will give it a blur effect. Let's say a Gaussian blur, and of course you adjust the amount depending on the size of your stroke and the size of your drawing overall drawing. So you can be also the fact that it depends if you have something which is more like a plastic, which is a highlight which is bright but less concentrated than a metal one. So it depends on the kind of texture you want to show. And what I often use, in that case it won't be super visible, but we will see later in the case study, is to use the profile, and especially this profile, which is a transition. You see that it starts gradually, you have a top and then gradually vanish. And I think that the combination of this profile and the blur effect is very, very powerful. It's not super visible here, but actually when you have some shape, you see you start to have some round shape or something like that. You want to show some fold or something like that, because of course you can do it with dark colors. It's just and it's a combination of the profile and the blur effect is very interesting. So gradient, copy with fusion mode, and profile, these are the main tool I use. In some cases I can use some mask to hide some part, but most of the time I don't need to use that. And of course you know about the other kind of thing, which is the blur effect. You just take some let's say I make some highlights, so I just reverse. Okay, I have this and I want to make some kind of highlights here as well, and you use the blur effect, which you see, and the only thing is you make it strong. In some case you can even double it, means you have it and you copy another one, and the other one has a less strong blur effect. Anyway, it depends on what you want to do, but in all that cases it's very very interesting, because you can you really can have some smooth transition. After, it's a work of balancing the darkness and the brightness of the colors, and of course using some consistent colors. For me, I'm not super specialist in colors, so I try to use a limited palette every time, limited swatch every time, not a big amount of different colors. So I feel more comfortable to handle my image if I know that I don't have to think too much about the amount of this color or that color. So these are the most useful tool for me. But in some cases you may be willing to use the gradient here, mesh gradient editor, which is a powerful tool, but in my opinion it's too complicated. So just using this couple of tools give me the result I need. So I think it's quite fair. So let's see some application in the image I showed you in the beginning. Okay, so let's do this little case study. As usual, I start with a pencil sketch, which is my way of working, my process, always starting on the paper sheet. As you can see, the character is a little bit freaky. It's also the kind of things I like to draw, but I make it cuter and cuter. Every step you can see a little difference, and it becomes a little bit a nicer kid. So after doing this step, I take a photo or I scan, depending on what I have available. And I do some research, some color research with a raster image software, like in that case it's Affinity Photo. And I make several tries until I find the one that I like. You will see that I have a very basic logo in the beginning. After I put my Muga design, my own VectorStyler logo, and then in the end some kind of VS, which is not the real logo of VectorStyler, it's just like a little reference. And in that case I know exactly the color I will use because I've done this step. It can happen previously, now I'm using this process a lot, but previously sometimes I just start with a sketch that I scan, and I trace my my vector lines just above and make some color research, but sometimes it takes more time, and the raster is very efficient. I mean, in half an hour I can do the image I want. So, and starting from that, it would be the reference colors. I will even pick with the color picker or the style picker to use in my vector drawing. Okay, so now you see my final one, the the vector one, so it's a little bit different as well. It's a little bit cleaner, maybe a little bit less expression, a little bit more stiff, but it's also part of a style. It means I totally accept the fact that most of my sketches are more expressive than the final drawing, but the vector, I think it's also this part of a style, and I totally I have no problem with that. Okay, so we can see the line work. In my case, I try to make it clean as much as possible, because when there are too many overlapping shapes, it can be confusing, and sometimes if it's a little bit, I have to be a little bit accurate, or the elements are quite small, things like this. I want to have something the cleaner I can. So one of my strategy I just mentioned before is to copy and paste the exact same shape. And using the fusion mode and using transparency and some mask effect and just the blur effect, I can make some transition and some different effect inside the same shape, which looks apparently like one shape, but actually is several shapes. Let's say, for instance, the cheek here, it's several shapes one above each other. So this is a way I like. I know, but because VectorStyler, like some other software, he has the gradient mesh, but to be honest, in every software I find it too complicated, and I have some nice control just using these simple tricks, and I'm quite happy about the result. And I think that spending twice the time trying to master the gradient mesh wouldn't help me much, and I feel comfortable with this workflow. So Command Y. So talking about the face, so let's say that some elements, very simple elements, for instance, you have a cheek here. So when you have this cheek, it's here, and you see that it's a very simple shape with just a gradient, okay? So we have a gradient here. This is the gradient I use. Gradient concentric, which is called a radial in some other software. And I just make this, but the second part is plus what I had to the gradient is, of course, you can see I had a blur effect, which is, you can see the little camera here. So I double click, you see I have my Gaussian blur. So the settings depends on the size of your image, of course, and you have to get some different tries. And so these two effects, just using a gradient plus the blur effect, it gives you some nice and simple transition. Okay, so it's quite nice. On the top, I just add some little highlights, but not too strong. This is one of the things in that case. If you want something which is soft, you don't make some too strong contrast. You use some very simple contrast. In that case, you have a color which is just a basic color, and I also apply a blur. I have some of the highlights which are separated from the shape they are on. For instance, I can have a layer for the head, and inside this layer there will be some of the highlights, but in some case also, if they are really on the top of all of the layer, I want to use it because I can have some nice settings that I can do at once. For instance, I can have all the highlights on the same layer, but I find a little bit too strong, so I can just use the property of a layer, and for instance I put it like 90% transparency, I mean opacity, instead of having it full 100%, and I can control a lot of elements at the same time. But in some cases, because of a shape is specific, especially for instance when I use my lines to create these highlights, I have to make them inside the shape, because the shape is the container. So in that case, this kind of highlights, they have to be inside the shape, so in the same layer. But some of the other highlights, if they don't depend on the shape, I prefer to have them on a separate layer. So this is how I do. You can see that for the eye, especially for the part of the eye, I have the eyelid. I just use a simple gradient, and for the shadow, well, the eyelid between eyebrows and eyelid, I use just simple colors, and I use once again my blur effect to make some smooth transition. For the eye itself, I use a gradient, concentric gradient, which is actually I was talking about how the light is bouncing, and that's why I use some of this kind of gradient here, and I have some little highlights that I use after that, and it gives this round smooth look instead of using, of course, a linear gradient, which make your shape look very flat. So I try to create all the time a little shadow and things like this, and it gives some volume. It gives the volume feel on the work. I mentioned previously about the colors, and as you can see, this is probably, not sure, but probably the only part when I use a full black and full white in this image. I try to really reduce the use of black and white, because reducing it makes it more powerful, and so by contrast with the other shape will look smoother, and it gives also a bigger strength to the eye. So that's how I do. Another trick, this one is very simple for the nose. It's just basic, like I say, and it's the same effect like I do a highlight here. I just clip a shape. You can see this shape. I clip it inside, and inside the whole nose, and I just put some blur effect again, and give me some nice and simple transition. So it's always the same effect. Here you have a line. I have copied the top of the nose. I just erase the line on the bottom. I keep the one on the top, and I use my traditional, if I can say traditional, but what I call light here, which is a line. You see, if you check Alt W, you can see that it has a profile. So it starts gradually and it ends gradually, and I had a little blur. And I found this is really interesting. You have a nice control, and you have nice transition between the elements. The only tricky part here was the fact that to give this cheek round, I wanted to give it here as well, but since I use some here, I use some blur effect, what happened is it was becoming invisible in that case. Which means that out of when I was here, out of the shape, it was blurry, and so by the transparency of the blurriness, you could see the ear on the background. So I had a little trick. I copied the round the circle that contains everything. I call it container. I give it no color, whatever it's the feel of a stroke color. I just put nothing. It's just a container. So I put it inside my blurry shape, and then I also make a copy of the same shape but with no blur. And the copy of a shape with no blur, I will show you. You can see here there is no more blur. You can see the transition is not like here smooth. This is just a copy, and this copy I also put a mask to make it gradually visible, and then you can see that on the left part it's invisible. And if I mix the two, I mix the blurry part and the non-blurry part, and I have the mask to make the transition. It gives me here the opacity I need, because I have to hide the here, and here I have the smooth transition. This is the only tricky part. The rest is quite simple, is what I just mentioned in the previous step, which is gradient and blur most of the time, and the use of a mask from time to time. Okay, so now we can just talk a little bit about the shoes. The idea of the shoes is just to mention some simple tricks. Like you can see, I use my I have my sole, and I have a line inside, okay, with a blur effect, which is very one of my classic, if I could say so. And once again, the idea is to really use something which is smooth. So if you exaggerate the blurriness, you will have something which look like over soft, too soft. And of course, if you don't use it enough, you have something which doesn't look like some plastic round shape, which is the case in that shoes. So same here, a little blur in the effect. It looks like, and this one uses a blur and inner shadow. So it gives this little feel of the shape is a little bit concave. So this is interesting here. Here on the top is the classic, like I'm using. Let me just find the shoe. Sorry for the time. So I have my shoe and I have my shadow inside. Okay, as you can see, the shadow is here. This is this shape, and this shape I just give it a blur. It's clipped inside. Of course, it goes over the shape. It's clipped inside, and I give a blur, and you give some nice transition. Of course, I have to follow the logical shape, but it gives a nice feeling. For the scratch, what is interesting is that it's just a simple linear gradient, and this is very simple. You see, you can have it here. You see the gradient is very basic. It's just the orientation of the gradient that has to be logical. Okay, the direction, of course, the direction is here, and it's following the light source. So if it's not flat or too vertical or something like that, it gives a good feeling, and it's interesting. And I have these highlights always the same. I copy the global shape here. I erase this part of the lines, and I use my profile, and you know the trick now. Just a line. I use my profile, always the same, and some blur effect. And of course, you have a total control. Sometimes you find it too bright. Sometimes you find it too I don't know, too red or whatever. You have a nice control on it. So this is not very complicated. It's just once you have your own process, your own workflow, I think it's not very complicated. And using the color picker, it can be or the style picker here. The style picker can help also you to really reproduce the effect you want very fast. For instance, you have a shape here, you could just create an ellipse and you pick up some effects from another one, and it's very fast. To be honest, I could make a library of gradient, because VectorStyler has very interesting preset functions, and of course the preset functions also apply to gradients. But to be honest, I like the style picker, and I think it's very fast and effective. So I have no problem, and I don't need to create my library. It means once I feel like I have a nice gradient or something like that, I just create the other shape and I pick up the effect, and I find it very powerful. So that's it for today. I hope you learned something interesting, and you know that if you have questions, you can find some other people very qualified on the forum of VectorStyler. And also, if you're using another software, I think that some of the tips and some of the process may apply to other software. So enjoy, and see you soon. Bye bye.